Objectivity. Epistemology is necessary for practical purposes as a guide to man in the proper use of his conceptual faculty. Thinking, to be valid, must adhere to reality. Concepts is objective. Take away the mechanism of human consciousness in the realm of concepts, universals, abstractions is thereby erased. The concretes that exist, the objects of perception, would still remain as concretes, but the perspective that regards them as units would be gone. They represent reality as processed by a volitional human consciousness. This is the status that we describe as objective. Objectivity is volitional adherence to reality by the method of logic. To be objective in one's conceptual activities is volitionally to adhere to reality by following certain rules of method, a method based on facts and appropriate to man's form of cognition. Logic is a volitional consciousness's method of conforming to reality. It is the method of reason. Logic is the art of non-contradictory identification. Existence is identity, consciousness is identification. A contradiction is a negation of identity and therefore of reality. To be A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect is to be nothing. Whenever one moves by a volitional process from known data to a new cognition ostensibly based on these data, the ruling question must be, can the new cognition be integrated without contradiction into the sum of one's knowledge? If logic is to be the means of objectivity, a logical conclusion must be derived from reality. It must be warranted by antecedent knowledge which itself may rest on earlier knowledge and so on back until one reaches the self-evident, the data of senses. This kind of chain and nothing less is what we require as proof of an idea. Proof is the process of establishing truth by reducing a proposition to axioms, i.e., ultimately, to sensory evidence. Such reduction is the only means man has of discovering the relationship between non-axiomatic propositions and the facts of reality. Knowledge is contextual. Human knowledge on every level is relational. It is an organization of elements, each relevant to and bearing on the others. Knowledge is not a juxtaposition of independent items, it is a unity. It is not a heap of self-sufficient atoms of consciousness, each of which can exist or be dealt with apart from the rest. On the contrary, knowledge at each stage is a total, a sum, a single whole. Metaphysically, there is only one universe. This means that everything in reality is interconnected. Every entity is related in some way to the others, each somehow affects and is affected by the others. Nothing is a completely isolated fact, without causes or effects. No aspect of the total can exist ultimately apart from the total. Knowledge, therefore, which seeks to grasp reality, must also be a total. Its elements must be interconnected to form a unified whole reflecting the whole which is the universe. What is the full context of an idea? Everything known at that stage of development, the sum of available knowledge. A man must work to integrate a new idea. Since a conceptual consciousness is an integrating mechanism, it demands the integration of all its contents. One step at a time, a man must relate a new item to his previous ideas. To the extent of his knowledge, he must search for aspects, presuppositions, implications, applications of the new idea that bear on his previous views in any field, and he must identify explicitly the logical relationships he discovers. If he finds a contradiction anywhere, he must eliminate it. Judging on the basis of the available evidence, he must either amend his former views or reject the new claim. Every new idea you read in these pages should represent the beginning, not the end, of a thought process. If the idea sounds reasonable, you should give it not merely a nod of approval, but hours of assiduous mental work. For example, suppose that, having accepted the altruist ethics, you then hear our theory of egoism and find it appealing. You must then ask, what arguments, if any, did I have for my previous view? Can I answer them? What arguments are offered for the objectivist view? Do they stand up? If you decide for egoism, you must then explicitly reject altruism along with all the premises that led you to it and all the conclusions to which it leads as far as you can pursue the trails. If you accepted altruism as the word of God, for instance, ask yourself, what does my new ethics do to my view of the basis of ethics? What does it do to other ideas I have accepted as God's word, for example, in regard to abortion, sex, evolution? What does all this imply for the belief in divine revelation or in God? Which philosophy has the better case, theism or atheism? Thought is identification and integration, the asking of what, and then, so what? What is the new fact or claim? What does it imply for the rest of my beliefs? Compartmentalization is an improper form of specialization. It consists not merely in specializing, but in regarding one's specialty as a dissociated fiefdom unrelated to the rest of human knowledge. In fact, however, all knowledge is interconnected. Since philosophy is the science that deals with the widest abstractions, it alone can act as the ultimate integrator of human knowledge. If you avail yourself of the power of a rational epistemology, you do not have to fear new data or new ideas. The more you learn, if you learn it properly, the more clear you become and the more you know. Knowledge is hierarchical. A first-level concept is one formed directly from perceptual data, without the need of prior conceptualization. Higher-level concepts, by contrast, represent a relatively advanced cognition. They cannot be formed directly from perceptual data, but presuppose earlier concepts. Cognitive items differ in a crucial respect in their distance from the perceptual level. Knowledge, therefore, has a hierarchical structure. Hierarchy, in general, as the Oxford English Dictionary reports, means a body of persons or things ranked in grades, orders, or classes, one above another. A hierarchy of knowledge means a body of concepts and conclusions ranked in order of logical dependence, one upon another, according to each item's distance from the base of the structure. The base is the perceptual data with which cognition begins. A higher-level item is dependent on the grasp of a series of earlier items, but that series is not necessarily unique in content. Within the requisite overall structure, there may be many alternatives in detail. The epistemological responsibility imposed on man by the fact that knowledge is contextual is the need of integration. The responsibility imposed by the fact that knowledge is hierarchical is the need of reduction. Reduction is the means of connecting an advanced knowledge to reality by traveling backward through the hierarchical structure involved, i.e., in the reverse order of that required to reach the knowledge. Reduction is the process of identifying in logical sequence the intermediate steps that relate a cognitive item to perceptual data. Men have to choose among purposes by means of their values, which fact generates certain kinds of mutual estimates and emotions, including esteem and affection, which make possible a certain kind of human relation, friendship. The fallacy of the stolen concept consists in using a higher-level concept while denying or ignoring its hierarchical roots, i.e., one or more of the earlier concepts on which it logically depends. The reason stolen concepts are so prevalent is that most people and most philosophers have no idea of the roots of a concept. In practice, they treat every concept as a primary, i.e., as a first-level abstraction, thus they tear the concept from any place in a hierarchy and thereby detach it from reality. The antidote is the process of reduction. The test of an invalid concept is the fact that it cannot be reduced to the perceptual level. Propositions too, if not axiomatic, must be brought back step by step to the perceptual level. Proof is a form of reduction. The conclusion to be proved is a higher-level cognition, whose link to reality lies in the premises. These in turn eventually lead back to the perceptual level. A logical conclusion is one which has been related without contradiction to the rest of a man's conclusions, the task of integration, and which has been related step by step to perceptual data, the task of reduction. A razor is a principle that slashes off a whole category of false and/or useless ideas. Rand's razor is addressed to anyone who enters the field of philosophy. It states, name your primaries, identify your starting points, including the concepts you take to be irreducible, and then establish that these are objective axioms. It is as futile to uphold true ideas while ignoring hierarchy as to uphold false ones. Contrary to today's conservatives, for example, it is not an axiom that man has the right to property. The right to property is a consequence of man's right to life, which right we can establish only if we know the nature and value of man's life. Which conclusion presupposes, among other things, that objective value judgments are possible. Which presupposes that objective knowledge is possible. Which depends on a certain relationship between man's mind and reality, i.e., between consciousness and existence. When thinkers base their theories not on the facts of reality but on the unscrutinized conclusions of their predecessors, the result is a uniquely repellent kind of intellectual structure, not a hierarchy of knowledge but of increasingly contorted and insolvable errors. Intrinsicism and subjectivism as the two forms of rejecting objectivity. Intrinsicism. Platonic realism. Concepts refer to otherworldly universes. Universals are real out there. Concepts in existence apart from consciousness. Knowledge is the grasp of an object through the passive absorption of revelations. Begins by appearing to champion reality, but ends by upholding the primacy of a supernatural consciousness. Influence the medieval era. Detach logic from percepts. Remain loyal to concepts that clash with reality. Existence alone is the active factor in cognition, consciousness contributes nothing. Subjectivism. Skeptic nominalism. Every existent is unique, concepts are arbitrary. Universals are nominal in here. Concepts in consciousness apart from existence. Knowledge is the creation of an object through the active inner processes of the subject. Begins by advocating the primacy of human consciousness, but ends concluding that either each individual creates his own private universe or that facts are the creation of a group. Influence the past 2 centuries. Detach logic from the world. Remain loyal to percepts by dispensing with concepts. Consciousness alone is the operative factor in cognition, existence is irrelevant. Objectivism. Knowledge is the grasp of an object through an active, reality-based process chosen by the subject. There is no consciousness without existence and no knowledge of existence without consciousness. Historically, the 3 main theories of concepts are Platonic realism, Aristotelian realism, and nominalism. Plato held that concepts refer to otherworldly universes, to non-material forms such as manus, tablehood, goodness, which, he believed, are independent of consciousness and of any concrete embodiments. Aristotle's theory is more naturalistic than Plato's, but bears Plato's imprint. Every entity, says Aristotle, is a metaphysical compound made of 2 elements, form and matter, or structure and stuff. Nominalism, which was developed largely by skeptic philosophers from Protagoras to Hume to Dewey and Wittgenstein. Every existent, in this view, is unique, there is nothing the same uniting the members of a group, there is no metaphysical basis for classifications. The first side holds that universal or real out there, the second, that they are nominal in here in the sense of being arbitrary linguistic creations. In the one view, concepts represent phenomena of existence apart from consciousness. In the other view, they represent phenomena of consciousness apart from existence. The first of these approaches, in any variant, we identify as intrinsicism, the second as subjectivism. The objective approach to concepts leads to the view that knowledge is the grasp of an object through an active, reality-based process chosen by the subject. Intrinsicism leads to the view that knowledge is the grasp of an object through the passive absorption of revelations. Subjectivism leads to the view that knowledge is the creation of an object through the active inner processes of the subject. Intrinsicists describe man's faculty of just knowing by many names, including intuition, a sixth sense, extrasensory perception, reminiscence, and divine revelation. To those who understand, no explanation is necessary. To those who do not, none is possible. This indeed was the historical development from Plato to Christianity. If abstractions are otherworldly phenomena, therefore, they must be construed as ideas in an otherworldly intellect, i.e., as thoughts in the mind of God, who periodically in his goodness reveals some of them to man. Intrinsicism begins by appearing to champion reality. It ends, however, by upholding the primacy of consciousness, of a supernatural consciousness. Subjectivism, by contrast, is exemplified by Kant and John Dewey. It begins by advocating the primacy of consciousness, of human consciousness. The subjectivist rejects the mystic approach to epistemology. Revelation, he recognizes, is not a valid means of knowledge. But, he continues, there is no other means of knowing an external object, it is revelation of some sort or nothing. In the personal version of this doctrine, each individual creates his own private universe. In the social version, facts are the creation of a group. The culmination of this approach is pragmatism. Pragmatism holds that the concept of reality is invalid, that the quest for absolutes is a perversion, and that truth is not correspondence to fact but rather that which works. Works here means satisfies for the nonce the arbitrary desires of men. It is on Aristotle's epistemological discoveries, including his implicit recognition of context and hierarchy, that men have built ever since, to the extent that they have built cognitively, as against stagnating or regressing. Tragically, however, Aristotle's epistemology, in part, because of his contradictions, its own intrinsicist aspects, has seldom been a dominant historical factor. It has never had the monolithic, enduring influence enjoyed by intrinsicism in the medieval era and subjectivism in the past 2 centuries. Neither of these 2 schools is equipped to grasp the need of logic. After Aristotle's discoveries, no school can afford to ignore logic. What the non-Aristotelians do, however, is not to use logic as a means of objectivity, but to take the field over reinterpreting its nature in accordance with their own premises. The intrinsicists, who write off this world as unreal and unintelligible, detach logic from percepts. The subjectivists, who reject supernaturalism and stress sensations or percepts, also detach logic from the world. They call it logic without ontology. When men are deprived of their method of cognition, they have no means of validating their conclusions, no way to distinguish truth from error, fact from wish, reality from fantasy. The consequence is frustration and failure, the failure of their conclusions, including their moral conclusions, to serve as reliable guides to action. This is the cause that explains the popularity of the notion that an idea may be good in theory, but not work in practice. This notion is impossible to us. A theory is an identification of the facts of reality and/or of guidelines for human action. A good theory is a true theory, one that recognizes all the relevant facts, including the facts of human nature, and integrates them into a non-contradictory whole. Such a theory has to work in practice. The theory-practice dichotomy is itself a theory. Its source is a breach between concepts and percepts. Given such a breach, thought comes to be viewed as pertaining to one world, the world of Platonic forms, or of Kantian phenomena, or of linguistic constructs, while action is viewed as pertaining to an opposite world, the world of concretes or of things in themselves, or of empirical data. In this setup, one expects an idea to be schizophrenic. One expects it to be good in one world, but not in the other, good in theory, but not in practice. The consequence is to offer mankind a monstrous choice. Practice theories that are impracticable, these theorists declare, or dismiss theory as a superfluity and even a threat. This means remain loyal to concepts that clash with reality, or remain loyal to percepts by dispensing with concepts. The first is the intrinsicist choice, the second is the choice of the subjectivist. No one departs from reality on the perceptual level, one can do so only on the volitional, conceptual level. The primary source of the mind-body dichotomy and of all the suffering it has caused from Pythagoras to the present is a false view of the mind, i.e., of concepts. The solution is to return to the axioms of philosophy, existence and consciousness, and identify their actual relationship within a conceptual process. Existence alone, says the intrinsicist, is the active factor in cognition. Consciousness, in essence, contributes nothing, it is merely a receptacle, an emptiness waiting to be filled. Consciousness alone, says the subjectivist, is the operative factor in cognition. Existence, being unreal or unknowable, is irrelevant. There is no consciousness without existence and no knowledge of existence without consciousness. Reason,